Today I want to talk about compiler flags and why you should care about them. There are hundreds of flags in GCC and Clang for setting language options, warnings, optimizations and more. But the ones I want to talk about are the security flags. You might think that security features would be enabled by default, but only some of them are. The one I want to look at in particular is Fortify Source, which is supported by both Clang and GCC. So, to the terminal. So I've got a simple project here. We've got a Docker file and a fortify.c file. I've got a Docker file just because I want to run this inside a container for a consistent environment. I get slightly different results on my Mac than I do from running in a Linux container. So the Docker file, very simple. It's just setting up a development environment with GCC and Vim effectively, plus our source code. If we build that, we run that. We have our file here. And now what this does is we have three different buffer overflows effectively. So the simplest one here is down the bottom, overflow buffer. All that does, and this should be fairly understandable even if you don't know much C, all it does is try to write more characters than will fit into a buffer. So we've got a buffer that can handle 8 characters, and we try to put more text than fits using the strcopy command. Then print it out to see what's there. In the overflow struct one, it's basically the same idea, except our buffer is hidden inside a struct, or inside a struct inside a struct. The memset one is a little bit more complicated. It does take an argument. The argument is always 0, which is falsy value in C effectively. We still have our small buffer of only 8 characters, but this time we do a little bit of obfuscation effectively, where you use a pointer, and there's a malloc here. This malloc never actually gets called because we set this value to 0, but if it was called, then the string would fit inside this buffer. But it's not called, so when we do this memset, what memset will do is write 22 values of 0 into the buffer, and of course 22 values won't fit inside here. And then we print it out again. Okay, so let's see what that looks like when we build it. So what I ran there was dfortify source equals 0, so we turned off fortify source. I've also turned off the stack protector. I'll show you what difference that makes in a moment. We've built it with fortify source off, and we've called it fortify. So if I run fortify with basically all the protections off, then well, you get it basically runs through all the examples. So we ran the memset overflow, we ran the overflow struct, we ran the simple buffer overflow, and we got to the end of the program effectively. What happens if we try different values? If we do fortify source equals 1, and I should say that you do still get various warnings, so it should be obvious that something not great is going on here. If I have fortify source equals 1, it does catch the simple buffer overflow. If we up it to 2, this time we catch the overflow struct as well, and so it bails out at that point, so we never get to the simple buffer overflow. And you won't be too surprised if I up it to 3, this time I catch the first buffer overflow in the memset overflow. So that's a difference between the different levels. They basically catch slightly more complicated issues. So the other one was there's no stack protector. I had to turn that off because otherwise you get this, which is quite nice. It realizes that you've overwritten the stack, or try to overwrite the stack. So that is pretty interesting, and we can see how these flags can potentially help you avoid overflow attacks. Now, all your Linux distributions compile source code into packages, and it turns out that different Linux distributions use different sets of flags by default, and using fortify source equals 3 is definitely not guaranteed. At Chainguard, we recently updated our default flags in line with OpenSSF recommendations, which does include fortify source equals 3. So if you use Chainguard Images, you're automatically taking advantage of these security features. I've put some links in the description for where you can get hold of Chainguard Images and some more information on the flags. So I hope that was helpful. As ever, please get in touch if you have any thoughts or questions.